Hey everybody, I'm Andrew, and today I want to take a look at the Tower 200 case by Thermaltake. Now, I did the review of the Tower 100 some time ago. Really awesome little case. I've done several builds in this thing, just messing around with it and having fun. Last year, I did a build and a review of the Tower 500 case, which to date has been my favorite case of all time. In fact, I'm still using that case as my daily driver. I just love the look of it. But anyways, today we've got the Tower 200, which I think is just a little bit bigger than the Tower 100. It's still a mini tower. It's a Mini-ITX case. Now, one of the questions I got on the Tower 100 occasionally was, can you do more than 120 millimeter AIO? And the short answer to that is no, not really without doing some sort of modification or getting fancy with it. But that's one of the big improvements of the Tower 200 is it does allow on the right side for 240 or a 280 millimeter AIO. So in this video, I'm going to basically just unbox this. We'll do a basic teardown. We'll kind of go through it and talk about all of the different cooling components and hardware components you can install in it. I am going to do a build in this, and I'll come back and give you my thoughts and opinions. So to start, let's go ahead and get it unboxed, and we'll start tearing it down and take a tour of it. So right out of the box, everything looks to be in good order. I don't see any issues with it. Sometimes you don't notice that until you start building in it. So as you can see, there is a fairly sizable difference between the Tower 100 and the Tower 200. Now, the first thing you want to know is to get the top cover off, because this will also be where you're going to manage your cables, because the motherboard is at a 90-degree angle from normal, so your cables and everything are going to come through the top. To remove the top cover, it's basically just push and release, and there's two release mechanisms up here, and once you do that, it just kind of pops up. It's got a little lip on it, and you lift that up, and this cover comes right off. Now, the top cover here does have filter material in here, but this is not really a removable filter. But you know, just by nature of it being on this component, you could remove it and you could clean the whole thing. Now, the next component here is the top plastic bezel. This one is toolless. There really is no screws on this. Top bezel off, you just want to kind of grasp it and give it a firm tug. Also, just put some leverage in here and just kind of push up, and it just comes off. Once you get the top bezel off, that allows you to then remove the left and the right sides. Now, let's start with the left side here, and there's just a little lip at the very top, and you can kind of just grab that. Really doesn't require any force, but that will just release, and then there's a little lip at the bottom that just grabs over the bottom cover here. So, but then you can just pull that away. Now, this is a removable filter, and the left and the right sides are exactly the same. Now, to remove the front glass, you do not need to remove the top bezel, which in my opinion is a great improvement, because that just allows you at any given time to get in here and make modifications and mess with things. But basically, to remove the front glass, if you try to just pull it here, it will not give. Up in the front center, it's also one of these push and release mechanisms. So basically, you're just going to push at the top, and it just releases. Now, again, you can do this anytime you want, and then just remove it. It's got a little lip on the bottom here that, again, just grabs this bottom panel, and then the glass comes off. So, all right, moving around to the right side, it is basically the same as the left. Little lip on the top, pull it, removes, filter piece. Put that back in. It's magnetically attached. All right, so to get the back cover off, you just need to pull straight out on it. Now, you could do this with the top bezel on. It's a little easier with it off, but anyways, you just need to get a grip on it somewhere, and it just pulls straight out. And it just has 4 posts that kind of just lock in here, and it just comes right off. So there's no other mechanism really holding that on. So the rear panel does have a removable magnetic air filter. Easy to pull it off, wash it, and put it back on. So pre-installed is the first 140 millimeter fan from Thermaltake. Now, it's a basic fan, no RGB lighting on it, and it does have the Thermaltake daisy chain cable system. So gives you the ability to add a couple of other fans into this system. Now, on the rear panel, you get the option of 2 140 millimeter fans or 2 120 millimeter fans. I'll say up to, because you can just do a single one if you prefer. But the mounting points are there for either size fan, so very cool. All right, so we'll stay in the back panel here. Now, there is a little motherboard tray here, and there's just 2 thumb screws up at the top. They are a little tight as usual from the factory, so let's go ahead and remove them. Now, once you get the screws removed, you're just basically going to lift up on the tray, and then it's going to disengage these little hooks on the side here, on both sides, the left and the right side. Those will disengage and you can pull it out. It's got mounting holes for 2.5-inch drives or 3.5-inch drives, 2 each. Now it also does have holes that are marked for fans, and you would have room for 140 millimeter fan or 120 millimeter fan here. Now, really important to note, the documentation doesn't suggest putting a fan here. It doesn't show it, but it is marked on here and it does fit. But if you were to put a fan on this and put it back in, there is no room to put fans on the rear cover if you have a fan here. It just is going to interfere with both positions. Now, attached to this also is an accessory bag, which we'll get to here in just a minute. This looks like this has got your screws. It's got the power supply covers and everything over here, which we'll talk more about in a minute. So also in the rear, you get these cable management guides. There's 3 on each side. Now, these are just kind of a plastic clip in here that just kind of hugs into the side of the case. And they do screw in, so you can remove those if you want. There's a screw just right here inside near where the motherboard mounts, and you could remove those if you want. Now, you can remove the power supply mounting bezel here and attach it to your power supply and put it back in. And we'll mount just a standard ATX power supply. And the maximum length power supply is 220 millimeters, so it should fit most power supplies that you would want to tuck in here. Now, there is a dust filter on the bottom. You just basically want to grab down here and it just kind of pulls right out. Nice and easy to do. Again, you can just clean this and put it back in. Power supply cage is removable. I don't think in the majority of builds you're probably going to need to do so, but if you're doing some fancy custom work in here, it may be beneficial in some cases to have this out of your way, at least temporarily. So I do like the fact that it is removable. And there's just 4 screws on the bottom. The cage just comes out, and then you get full access to the basement here. All right, now let's talk about the GPU bracket that's here for just a second. This is meant just to hold and stabilize a GPU should you need to use it. Now, to adjust it, there's just a single thumb screw here. And it's a little tight from the factory, but then you can slide this mechanism in and out and tighten it up and do whatever you need to do. Now, in some cases, you may not want to use that little bracket, so it is removable. There's just a couple of screws here in the back. Basically, get those 3 screws out, and the little GPU bracket pops right out. So moving over to the right side, we're going to see one of the key differences between this and the Tower 100. And it is going to be this fan mounting bracket. And this bracket is just 2 screws at the top to remove it. So get your 2 screws out and then it just kind of falls away, and it's just got 2 little feet that engage here in the power supply shroud on the top. So there's no locking mechanism or anything like that. So make sure you have a grip on it before it comes out. On this plate, you can mount 220 millimeter fans or 240 millimeter fans. Also supports a 240 millimeter radiator or a 280 millimeter radiator. You would just mount that all to this plate and tuck it back in and you are ready to go. It's also on the right side is where the other 2 SSD mounting trays are. So there's just 2 of them here. There's just a single screw that removes each one. And it just pops out. There's a couple little feet on the bottom that just engage in the bottom. Once you get that out, you can mount your drive, and it's got a little hole here for the cables should you need to use that. Now let's talk about the left side of the case real quick. Now there's a cutout over here where your GPU is going to go. Now the maximum GPU length for this case is 380 millimeters without the bezels in here. And if you choose to use the bezels to clean up the look, it's 280 millimeters. So make sure that your GPU is going to fit before you do that. Now in the accessory trays are a couple of different covers in order to cover up this hole here should you have a smaller GPU. So to install the plastic panel on the back here, there's just kind of 2 plastic tabs. That's going to engage a couple of holes here in the rear panel. And then there's a little hook in the front. And I'm just going to kind of engage that. It just kind of slips in there like that, nice and easy to do. Then this panel, it's the same exact thing. There should just be a couple of mounting tabs which will engage with the rear of the case, and then this little latch, we'll just stick it in the front. It's just a plastic cover, so you kind of just have to work it around a little bit until you can get that locking tab to lock into place. It kind of just covers up that hole, just making it look a little bit nicer. Now in the accessories bag just comes all the screws you need, a little speaker, some cable ties, and you are ready to go. So hold on to that. That's all your mounting screws for everything. Just a quick note on motherboard support. Now Thermaltake's website and the documentation for this case shows Mini-ITX only. But you can't help when you're building in it to notice that there are pre-tapped holes for micro ATX. In fact, they're marked M on the back plate. So now a quick search online shows a little bit of confusion as to whether micro ATX is actually supported. But I have seen some photos and pictures of micro ATX motherboards attached. And there's no reason why they shouldn't work. Albeit I think you do have to remove the GPU bracket. There may be some other considerations that aren't readily apparent, like do you have the right holes in the back plate to get all the cables into that board. Now I don't have a micro ATX board on hand right this second to test it with, but it looks like it does support it. Some of the reports coming out from YouTube are that it is supported, but I'm going to follow this video up pretty quick. I'm going to put that board in and see if there's any gotchas with putting it in there, anything that's unforeseen. Now, why Thermaltake wouldn't report that it supports micro ATX, I'm not sure. It seems like maybe the general consensus is your mileage may vary. There may be some boards out there that are not supported, but stay tuned. I'm going to follow up and report back on this particular subject. And if you choose to do air cooling, your maximum CPU heatsink height is going to be 200 millimeters. So again, if you're going to do air cooling, just make sure, check the measurement. This panel here is your power supply cover, and this can be removed. There's a couple of screws up front here. One, these are just right up here. These are kind of small screws. So we'll get those out, and then there's 2 screws in the rear, 1 and 2. So once you get those 4 screws out, you can kind of just work this piece out of here. Just kind of disengage it from the back, and kind of lift it up, and just kind of pivot it out. And anyways, you can get this case out. The power supply cover also supports a fan. You can get a 120 millimeter fan on here or a 140 millimeter fan. Your little mounting holes are here ready to go for you. So the front panel I/O includes a USB-C port, 2 USB 3.0 ports, a microphone and a headphone jack, power and a reset button, a power LED, and a hard drive LED. The front panel I/O is removable. You'll just need to undo the ties initially to get all the cables freed. But once that's done, there's just a couple of screws at the top here. Should you need to get this removed, replaced, you need to clean it, you need to modify it, whatever. And it just comes right off and the whole mechanism comes out. On the top, you also get your second pre-mounted 140 millimeter fan. The top of the case supports obviously a 140 millimeter fan, a 120 millimeter fan, or you could choose to do a 120 millimeter AIO. Now on the top, obviously, you get your 3 PCI slots where your video card's going to go. And this will also be where your motherboard I/O is going to be. So your cables are going to kind of route out through here and out through the back as we talked about earlier. Bottom case panels do remove for additional access into this lower basement area. But once you get the screw out, and this is one place I actually wish Thermaltake would use a captive screw. I've been messing around with that Tower 500 case a couple times, and you've got to try to lift it up and hold it while you try to fish that screw in there. It'd be nice if it was kind of a captive screw so you could do it one-handed. But once the screw is out of there, it just kind of lifts down and pops off. So each panel has its own removable filters, just a little grasp there at the top. You grab it, remove it, a couple little tabs at the bottom, clean it, put it back in. You are ready to go. Again, wish they had a thumb screw, but you can get that one out, take that screw out, and pop that out. This really opens up the bottom for you as you're doing cable management and things like that. You can get your hands in there, and it's just nice to be able to work with that. I didn't have too much trouble with this build, but the one thing that did aggravate me is this Corsair LCD panel. When I got it powered up and I started messing with it, I noticed that the display was at a 90 degree. Now on a normal case, when this motherboard is flipped back to its normal orientation, this panel is in the right orientation, but I thought no big deal. Got to be able to go into Corsair and rotate this panel in the software, right? Nope, as it turns out with the Corsair LCD panel, you cannot do that. They did update iCUE a little while back in that if you use the GIF function, GIF meaning you can do a picture or a GIF on this panel, you can rotate that in whatever orientation you want. So that'll look okay if you do it. But any of the built-in temperature outputs, anything else that's within iCUE, and there's quite a few different ways of displaying it, they're all going to be incorrect in this case. That's been fairly frustrating to me that Corsair can't get their act together enough after a couple of years to just rotate the panel. I don't know why that is. So anyways, I only bring that up because if you're thinking about this case or the Tower 100 or the Tower 500, for example, I would just have to recommend that you skip the Corsair LCD panel. The rest of the build really was kind of as expected. Didn't present any problems. I did use the brand new QX120 fans by Corsair and the IQ Link hub in this system. Now that greatly helps with cable management as far as all the RGB goes. I didn't have the new IQ Link AIO in a 240 millimeter. All I have is the 360 millimeter version of that. So I did end up taking another Corsair AIO and just put in the QX120 fans. So in this case, I do have the IQ Link hub, which is working great. I do have a commander core, which is what the AIO is plugged into. And I also do have a USB hub down there to power all of that. There isn't much clearance between the side of the pump head and where this fan plane is. So if you're gonna run air cooling, you might just want to be mindful if it's, some of these gigantic air coolers. It could theoretically interfere over here, but if you're doing an air cooler, you're probably not having an AIO in this position, so it'll give you another inch or so of clearance over there. So I think in most configurations and setup, that's not going to be a problem. It's pretty tight over here, but looks pretty good. Now, this video card, again, is not a powerful card. It's not very long, so I've got the power supply covers in. But there's plenty of room down there for some of the full-length cards. Just be mindful of what the specification is and what size video card you're going to put in. Now it's got room for a 3-slot video card. This one's a 2-slot card, but there is plenty of room over here, for some of the larger cards. Now, as far as cable management goes, down in the basement here, didn't have any problems with that, even though it's kind of a small footprint. There was plenty of room for the cables that I needed to put in here. Even depending on what kind of power supply cables you have, you can kind of zip tie them up and just tie them up and get them down there as best you can. I could definitely spend more time, and I say this on every build I do, but I could certainly spend more time and make it probably look a little bit prettier down in the bottom. But it's functional, everything's tidied up, everything's out of the way. I know where everything is and it'd be easy to work on. And there was plenty of room for the commander core, the USB hub, the IQ Link, and all of the power cables that go with that. So wasn't a problem. Cable management in the back, I really do like the tower cases and that you get these 2 corners that you can work with. This one where it's got the little cable management clips, those are just really cool. They work really well. I was happy to have those there. Tidies it up. For the rest of the cable management, just running the IO cables down the back wasn't a problem. I just tidied them up with some Velcro. Maybe go back and zip tie those. Now, as far as the aesthetics of the case, it is a little bit different. It's tight over here. And at first, if I'm being honest, I maybe didn't really like the way that it looked. But after kind of working with it, getting the RGB lights on, I do kind of like the way it is all kind of tight and compact in there. Now, that's the very nature of a mini tower case like this, right? But so the look on it, I'm actually kind of digging. It looks pretty good. This video card, again, not a powerful card. Some of the full-size cards with RGB would look better in here. In fact, it's about time for me to do some video card upgrades around here. But that's one place where this particular build maybe looks a little bit lacking, and that there's not much over here on this left side. If you haven't played around with the tower cases from Thermaltake, all the cables come out here on the back. So I've got my keyboard, mouse, video card, and a USB cable back here. Some people I don't think like that. It doesn't bother me at all, and it works pretty good. So, but anyways, they just kind of route out through the top here and down through the side. Your front I/O panel cables just run across the top. Of course, you can get creative with how you run all of these things and tidy it up. Again, the top piece here, this just clicks out and it gives you just nice, easy access to all of your cables in here. I did do some basic cooling tests on this hardware, and I'm running an AMD 5800X. I've got 5 fans, 3 intake, 2 exhaust. I put them all on a balanced fan curve within IQ. I did run all of the components at stock, so there's no overclocking or craziness going on here. Obviously, I've got the 240 millimeter radiator. The GPU is just a weak GPU. It's a 1650 NVIDIA GPU. No overclocking or anything crazy going on there. I did run the usual software. I ran ATA64 and did the stress test on that. Also ran Blender a little bit. The maximum temps I was getting on the CPU was 84C, which is acceptable and about what I've experienced with this hardware in the past. This was ramping up the fan RPM, obviously. So if you were to lower those fan RPMs, you're going to probably elevate those temperatures a little bit. So during my testing with all of this, like with ATX, I let that stress test run for a good 45 minutes. And then I popped all of the covers off on this case just to see if it was contributing anything into keeping those temps in that 84 range. It made no difference pulling the covers off or putting them on in any of the testing that I did. At least nothing that I was able to measure. I think the limiting factor here is going to be just what cooling components does your hardware and your configuration need. Is a 240 millimeter or a 280 millimeter radiator going to be adequate for that? If the answer to that is yes, then I think in most cases this case is not going to really contribute. Now your results are going to vary. If you put a more powerful GPU in here, that can crank out some heat, things like that. But again, the airflow in this just seems to be really good, only because it's such an open case. Great big holes in all the side panels. But overall, my opinion is this case really didn't contribute to any cooling problems. I didn't have any problems with it. And as long as you're not looking to do some big crazy setups and things like that, this case will be adequate. So overall, my impression of the Tower 200 case is I think it's a good step forward from the Tower 100. The only thing maybe I do miss from this case to this is I do miss a little bit of glass here. Now, I don't know if maybe Thermaltake will offer a new panel with some glass on the side. The Tower 100 case is just partial glass. It's not a full glass panel, but it is partial. I do kind of miss that a little bit, but I totally get from a cooling and functionality perspective why they did this. For just pure cooling, this is going to be the better case. And I don't really have any concerns or problems with building in it. The aesthetics look great. And I think the cooling functionality for most everybody is going to be right where you need it. It's got lots of options for you. And anyways, if you have any questions, comments, concerns about the Tower 200 case, please let me know. And anyways, that's going to do it for today. Thanks for watching.